So my name is Louise Begigle, and I'm just doing a shooter type of questions here at the University of Regina, just asking some people what they may or may not know of Thomas More Cusick. And so this gentleman here, I'm just going to ask if he can say his name. What is your name?
Roman Young from Shoal Lake Cree Nations.
All right, so by looking at this picture, what do you know of it? Or do you know who the person is?
I am kind of familiar with Thomas More because I have this book called Canada's Greatest Crime or something, and it's like it's a book that talks about like the residential schools, how it began and what went on in the residential schools from like a residential school survivor's perspective.
Do you know anything about him?
With Thomas More, he was taken into residential school, and they took a before picture, which was this one, and then they took another one a few years after he was in residential school, just to like provide a picture of how much change, like the change residential schools had effect on like people such as Thomas More.
So what are your thoughts when you see this picture?
Well, it does look like he'd be in a residential school. Like a picture, I've seen pictures like that from victims that are survivors from an Indian residential school, and they look pretty much similar. That's all I can think of as just a student or a kid that was stuck in the residential system.
Are you surprised, like when you see the before and after?
Yes, because it looks like he was at his home, like with the Indian regalia, and then it looks like he was taken away and put into a different, like brought up to be different, not his own culture type kid. Yeah.
Do you know who he is?
I have an idea of who he is from doing Indigenous Studies classes here at the First Nations University. I was using a book and it had that photo in it. A couple papers that I've done have actually had that photo just to kind of show the transformation before and after residential schools with Indigenous youth.
Okay. Do you know anything about him?
To be honest, I don't know a whole lot about him just besides the obvious in the picture. Like the image in his traditional regalia prior to school and then after school. That's about it, to be honest.
Did you know that he was from Muscopine right here in Saskatchewan?
I had no idea. I had a lot of family, like the last 3 generations of my family all attended the LeBret residential school, and I was the last person out of our family to attend there when it was turned into Whitecap.
It was him and his sister had attended the school, and his sister had died young, and he got sick as well from the school, and he got sent home, and he had died at a young age as well with his sister.
So that's probably as a result of like tuberculosis and all those other diseases that were going around?
Yeah, I think so. So what do you feel when you look at this picture?
I guess your first my first feeling, I guess, is just kind of that of, I guess, I don't know what you'd call it, sadness or a little bit of anger. I don't know. You just see a boy that, on first glance, it seems like he was forced to reform, forced to change because of our government's beliefs at the time. And it's I guess it's a mixture of sadness and anger.
Yeah, well, what we're doing is we're just making people aware about who he is, besides just having his picture and his name known as the face of residential school. So we're like letting people know a little bit more, like where he came from, who he was, besides just a boy in the picture. And him and his sister attended the school, and they both had passed away young. He got sick in the school, and then he got sent home where he had passed away. And we're guessing it's from tuberculosis. Yeah, that was like the most common disease that the students were passing away from. And so can you tell us like what your thoughts are, what you think of, or how you feel when you look at this picture?
You know, after sharing that with me, holding this tobacco in my hand, thanks for sharing that. That really struck home for me because as someone who's trying to educate myself to help the people, and the people, I mean the Indigenous people, there's a lot of things for us to overcome, and when I look at this picture and I think of, the cunning of the white man, something that was said at the signing of treaties is you must know your indigenous side, but this new Western side you must know. And before you told me that story, that's what I would look at this picture as is, he balanced his both sides as the cunning of the white man.
Yeah.
But, what happened in the reality is still kind of happens today to a lot of our indigenous people.
Yeah. Does it surprise you that he's just from Muscogee First Nations?
I always knew he was from somewhere within the area, with all the residential schools, and it never really said that he was, from the Regina Industrial School.
Yeah.
But I always knew he was a cousin or something.
So we all want to claim.
I'm Dr. Shawneen Pete, and I'm from Little Pine First Nation, and I'm the executive lead for indigenization here at the University of Regina.
Okay. So I just have a couple questions that I want to ask you in regards to this picture. What do you know about this picture?
I actually know quite a bit about this picture. I've been teaching about residential schools as a classroom teacher and in most of my university courses that I've taught. This past year I created a residential school bulletin board that has this image featured on it. And so what I wanted to do with my learners is as they go through the hall, I want them to recognize that this image is actually quite profound and then see the curricular linkages to the Saskatchewan curriculum for kindergarten, grade 1, 2, and 3. So I made those linkages obvious by putting a piece of yarn from the photo up to the curriculum outcome and indicators, and as a way of reminding them that even with little people, they can be empathetic to this child who's gone through so many changes.
Okay.
Yes.
Could you tell us what you know about Thomas?
You bet. Thomas was a student at the Regina Indian Industrial School, and a series of photos that were taken were presented like this in the before and after, as if the after is a better version of the civilized Indian, and it's part of that larger narrative about changing First Nations people, about them assimilating into Canadian society that was so much a part of the Indian residential schools, that its purpose, and its reason for being. So Thomas is really interesting because we don't really know much more about him just from the images. They don't tell us much in the details here, except that he was a student. We don't know what community he came from. We don't know his nation. We don't know any of those things. As a First Nations person, I can only assume that behind this picture are parents who experience loss of a community that is mourning. And those are some other stories that we don't get to see in this particular image. The other narrative that often, when I ask my students, who do you think he is? One of the things they say is that he was an abandoned child or an orphan child. And what I try to remind them that actually the system of oppression that operated actually removed children from a whole community of people who cared about that child. And so it wasn't that they were orphaned at all. They were actually a systemic removal of the child in order to disrupt the culture, to disrupt nationhood for Indian people.
So by looking at this picture alone, like what does it make you think or feel?
Well, I was one of the first generations in my family that didn't have to go through residential school, so I'm really conscious of how much of a privilege that is. At the same time, it's a reminder of how young our family members were when they went. My mom was 4 years old when she was taken to residential school, and they're small, vulnerable children being institutionalized, and that makes me really angry.
The Regina Indian Industrial School ran from 1891 to 1910. Thomas Moore Keesick was the 22nd child to be registered. These numbers were now what the students were referred to instead of their names. Duncan Campbell Scott, the superintendent of Aboriginal Affairs, once said, "I want to get rid of the Indian problem. I do not think, as a matter of fact, that the country ought to continuously protect a class of people who are able to stand alone. Our object is to continue until there is not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed into the body politic, and there is no Indian question, no Indian department." Despite being the face of assimilation of the residential schools, Thomas Moore Keesick was a mystery. He was thought to have been sent home from school after he caught consumption, where he died at the age of 12.